I would probably give two pieces of advice. One is take a long view. Take a long view of your business and take a long view of your relationships with investors, with co-founders, with employees, even with customers.
Gil Dibner, thank you so much for joining me on 20 Minute Leaders. We're finally here, and I'm so excited to do this with you.
Me too. Thanks, Michael.
I have to say that just going over the companies that you invested in, I'm a huge fan of probably half of them, and I think that it says a lot about your outlook on investments and how you approach different environments and different industries. And one of the things that took me that I took a note on when I read your bio is this idea that you're working to build category leaders. So even before we talk about you and your life, what is a category leader, and why is that sort of the mindset that you bring to investments?
I mean, I think there was a time, a few minutes ago when saying category leader was like, still a sort of a unique thing that some VCs said, and I think now all VCs are saying this. But I think the reason they use that term, I think it sort of indicates two things. I think the first thing is it suggests that you want a really large outcome, and
Right.
you want to be a leader in a category. You want to define the category and lead that category, and I think that's an indication of scale. I think another reason that people use that term is because successful founders, and I think successful venture capitalists or strategists in general, you're thinking about the way the world of business and technology kind of organizes itself. And I think I literally just had this conversation with a founder like an hour ago where they are competing for cloud management, infrastructure as code, blah blah blah. And at one point in the conversation, I was like, look, I don't really understand what your thesis is. There is a huge gaping problem in the cloud infrastructure management, infrastructure as code world, but there are like 250 startups that I know about if I went through the process of listing them all, which I would never do, that that I can't even keep track of them all. They're all rushing into that void trying to solve that pain. So the argument of the pain is not important, but what will happen over time is that they'll all converge. They'll all eventually, over the next 5-10 years, it'll become obvious what that category is and how one wins in that category. And I think what is important for founders, even at the earliest stages, is to try to have some kind of a thesis about how do you think your category is going to evolve? What do you think are going to be the driving forces that are going to make a company successful? What is the leader in that category going to look like? And then what are we doing today that gets us there? Right. And I think that framing is sort of helpful to remind ourselves and founders of that's what we're trying to do here. We're feeling our way through the dark to try to define categories. By the way, sometimes you're not defining a new category, you're just displacing an existing one with something far better. But it's important to know what the playing field is.
Right, but also as an early stage investor, it's not like you're talking to companies that have years of experience necessarily with working on their product and some genius insight that they have above other people. So how do you actually go about finding those right people that could potentially become category leaders as people, not just as their product?
Well, I mean, first of all, sometimes they do, right? And there's sometimes, we've been lucky to back, one or two second-time founders, notably Eldad Farkash at Firebolt, where we're thrilled to back him the second time after he's built Sisense. But in many cases, we have founders that have tremendous domain expertise. In other words, they understand, they haven't built a software company to dominate the category, but they understand their industry supremely well. And I think that deep domain expertise is a huge issue, a huge secret weapon for a lot of these companies. You're absolutely right. A lot of times the company building skills are new to people. They don't necessarily know how to manage people. They don't necessarily know how to recruit people. They don't necessarily know how to strategize about product strategy or even how to hire a product manager or what that looks like. But they often have an insight on a category, not to overuse that word, but they have an insight on on a space to say, hey, we have a company, for example, in oil and gas, and the CEO of that company worked in the oil and gas industry for, many, many years and understands it super well. And it was like, hey, I have a vision for how this is going to emerge. And I've been a customer of all of the terrible software tools that exist. And I've been suffering about this for years. And I have a vision for what it would have to look like to succeed. And so I'm going to build a company based on that set of insights. And so, we do try to filter for that kind of thing.
So a beautiful segue talking about oil and gas. I have to take you all the way back to your college days. You were working in an oil tanker in the Gulf of Mexico. What was that about?
Oil and gas. No, I mean, it was my dad is a maritime guy. He was a business consultant to the maritime industry for many years, and his father had sent him to work as a construction worker in high school in the summer to understand what real work was. And my dad wanted me to have a real work experience as well. And so in the summer of my freshman year, after my freshman year, he suggested to me that instead of taking some internship somewhere where I could put on a suit and tie and pretend to do something, I could go work on an oil tanker. And he knew the guy who ran this company because it was one of his clients. He said, hey, would you put my son on an asphalt tanker? Actually, it was called an ordinary seaman, like the most junior role possible. And asphalt has to be heated. I don't know if you know this, but asphalt will freeze if it's not heated. So Caribbean sun, middle of the summer, on a 600-foot heated oil tanker, effectively, that was carrying asphalt. It was stinky and horrible, but it was fantastic. The best time of my life. And nothing since then has felt like work. So it was an education.
Probably a very different experience than what a lot of your fellow Harvard classmates experienced that time.
I was super proud of myself. I thought I had discovered the secret to life. I was going to be the next Hemingway. That was my plan.
I love it. So Gil, walk me through a little bit of your journey. You're going to Harvard, you're studying economics, then you go to Wharton. And do you know that you're destined to support early stage entrepreneurs along their career?
I think I'm probably the most boring VC story of anyone. I wrote my college admission essay about how I wanted to be a VC in Israel when I was 18. So
really,
I think I pretty much had this figured out. I don't know where I can't find a copy of it, but I did write it. And I think it had to do with, I really liked the idea of innovation and technology. And I sort of had figured out that I was not smart enough to do this innovation myself. So I was like, okay, well, the closest I can get is I got to find some way to have these people want to hang out with me. So, the business seemed like a, logical way to do that. And I got to give my dad credit as well. I think there was a point in my life when I thought I wanted to be an engineer, and my dad, who was trained as an engineer but was always a business guy, said, I'm all for you studying STEM, but I think, it's actually, the business world is actually where a lot of these decisions get made, and you should look at that as well. And so that kind of led me down the economics path, and I found that was fascinating. And
that being said, about 10 minutes ago, we were having an interesting conversation about deep neural networks and how different companies are doing different interesting things with them. So obviously, you're still an engineer at heart, and you have that skill set. But how do you then go on to actually becoming an investor? Because I think that one of the things that I enjoy most hearing about this show is the journey of people and how they take that passion. I have yet to meet somebody who wrote their college admission essay on wanting to be a VC. But how do you then translate that interest, going through Harvard, Wharton, and then translating it to working with the Israeli and European ecosystem? And I'd also love to know why specifically that ecosystem?
Well, I think, the Israel thing for me was always a goal. I'd always wanted to live in Israel. I still want to live in Israel. It's the place I feel most at home. It's my identity. My mother's Israeli. I grew up in both countries. I love Israel. I think it's the most special place in the world for a million reasons. It has many problems and challenges and troubles, but so do many places. But I think I just got lucky with a series of experiences that exposed me to the Israeli technology world, fairly early. I just fell in love with that scene and with the brilliance and I think that there was I was exposed to the Israeli technology scene as early as, my last college internship. So 1998, when it really was a backwater. It really was flying against the tide, and no one really thought, there were three places in the world or maybe four places in the world you could build a semiconductor: Russia, Route 128 corridor in Boston, Silicon Valley, and Tel Aviv. That was it. And that was the center of the technology world. And Israel was kind of this island of amazing innovation when nobody was thinking about technology, nobody cared, nobody was paying any attention to it.
Unbelievable.
And so that was just very exciting to be part of that. I think the goal was to be part of the Israeli technology landscape. But I think when I got there, what I pretty quickly realized was that I was suddenly found myself an outsider I had a whole bunch of advantages, right? I came to Israel with an American college education.
Right.
I think just that gave me a whole bunch of credibility with people that hired me. I think they hired me because, hey, look, at least his college logos will look good in our fundraising deck, right? Even if he's an idiot, at least we can put the Wharton logo on the thing, right? But I think what I quickly realized was that I really was an idiot. And these people were super smart, and they were dealing with stuff that was incredibly complicated. And the years of technology engineering experience around the table every Sunday when we would review the deals at Genesis and at Gemini, you had 150 years of engineering experience around the table, and that was just the people who worked at the firm, right? And I had 0 years of anything, and just watching them, listening to them go through this was incredibly humbling. And the shared fascination with innovation, with founders that were pushing the boundaries in a bunch of ways, and the skill set of sort of uncovering the truth. I think that was the other lesson from Wall Street as well, where I worked in covering technology stocks in the bubble, and you had to get the truth pretty quickly because the bubble was bursting around us, and
right.
That's a whole other story for another episode. But I think being an outsider in the sense that I speak fluent Hebrew, but certainly not at that point, not about technology. Today I do, but then I didn't. I didn't have a technical degree. I didn't serve in the Army in any of these technical units. I didn't serve in the Army at all. I hadn't gone to high school with any of these people. I didn't share a lot of the same cultural references. I was really an outsider, on a million different levels.
Yet you leverage that as an asset, right? Because
I think I turned it into a bit of an asset in certain cases where there might have been some groupthink around the table. The founder is a pilot and the VC is a pilot, and pilots invest in pilots and I was I'm nothing. I'm just but so learning to judge founders and to judge their credibility and to participate in or to be a fly on the wall, I should say, in some very deep technical diligence where you're really, I'll never forget, for example, I was doing technical diligence on a tech company with a very senior, very experienced Russian immigrant to Israel who was a very, very senior CTO, and he was interviewing this Israeli, CTO, and the Israeli obviously fluent Hebrew, the Russian guy strong Russian accent, but super, super strong, and super, super smart, and at some point he just sort of stopped questioning and was like, okay, thank you. And I asked him, I was like, why did you stop? And he was like, because I realized you didn't know any of the answers. And I didn't want to embarrass him. And I was like, you see the level of depth. And I think that was always something to aspire to. And then the level of learning to really listen to some of these founders, to sort of understand what was motivating them, what was the technical insight that was driving them to spend the next 10 years of their life. And I think it also was a very different environment in the sense that today, for better or for worse, the default is everyone gets funded, right? That's the default. If you're halfway credible and you went to Stanford, no offense, you'll get funded. Someone's going to give you money to go build something and spend 3 years of your life building it. Then the default was no one got funded. It's just not going to work, right? And if you got an A round, there's no way in hell you're getting a B round. It's just not happening, right? So it was so being a founder back then in 2004, 2005, 2006, when there was literally no money, these people were crazy. These people were seriously committed to what they were doing. They were really passionate about building something from nothing in their domain. And you remember probably Israeli tech back in those days was all hardcore tech. It was security and Comtech semis and specialty semiconductor and photovoltaic stuff, and it was hardcore. and
Honestly, I
it was
wish I was
really
there.
fascinating.
I was probably about 9 years old at that time, I definitely think that I could have fit well.
Yeah, but you remember the Cytex logo on the highway and stuff like that, right? So
Definitely, definitely. But Gil, so today you're navigating a different world. You have both the navigation back then. Today, like you're mentioning, it's a different ball game, right? I mean, a lot of people have an easier time getting investments. There's a lot more money floating around. The world is becoming more globalized, and you have investors from different regions investing. You're sitting in London, investing primarily in Israel. Talk to me a little bit about exactly that. You're sitting in London. You have the European ecosystem as a strength. You have the Israeli mindset and the expertise as a strength. How do you then bring Angular Ventures to provide that value both to founders, and how do you even go and identify those right ones that you want to invest in?
this is a 20-minute show, right? So like I don't know if I can answer. I don't know if I answer half of that, but I think first of all, just for clarity, we invest agnostically across Europe and Israel, and the result of that is that we're about 50% Europe Israel, half and half. Um, how we provide value as a firm, I think, is comes from the roots of being specialists, being nimble. We have a very strong network. What we're trying to do as a firm is I think relatively unique in the sense that we are, we're specialists. We're highly concentrated. We're only going to do 6 to 8 deals a year, right? And
Wow.
we're looking at, last quarter alone, we saw 800 deals, right? Over
Wow.
800 deals, 814 deals in the past 90 days. I just happened to look at this morning, right? And
Wow.
and I think we did one, right? So like we're doing, very, very, very selective deal making on a very large pool, and we're narrowing that down super efficiently. We have a wonderful network of people that are close to us that help us with diligence. And what we try to do is we're actually, I think of almost like, microservices as the analogy. We've
Yeah.
sort of taken the value chain of the VC world and tried to like microservice it. And then those are what we call advisory partners or venture partners. So for example, Fred Simon from JFrog, Eldad Farkash from Sisense and Firebolt are venture partners. Jerry Dishler, who runs product at Google, is a venture advisor. Jen Shear, for example, who's the best U.S. immigration attorney on the planet, is a venture advisor. Meaning, when our companies have a U.S. immigration issue, and this actually came up like this morning, one of our founders wants to hire someone, and she doesn't want to get hired unless she can move. And so Jen is now involved in that process to make sure that we've got the visa issue sorted out. Like those are very adamatized, discrete sort of, okay, it's a service we can call on to provide value to a founder. Another example was a founder was like, hey, I've got this huge RFQ, right, for a deal that's like 20 times larger than any deal I've had so far in my company. How do I answer this quote? Well, how do I price it? What do I do? He's a Finnish founder. Within 48 hours, we had set up 2 hour-long calls with 2 different advisory partners who were experts in sales operations to get him like real-time answers to a real use case right now. And so a lot of funds have like a bunch of headshots of people that are sort of in their network. I've got the Secretary of Homeland Security. Like we have people that are not necessarily the most famous people in the universe, but they're people that I know. I've worked with them for years. I know they can deliver value. They're highly incentivized. They're highly aligned, and they can actually deliver that value in real time in a meaningful way. And I think that has a huge impact.
So forgive me for my language, but at the end it boils down to getting shit done, right? It's at the end it's executing when you actually need
Yeah,
tangible help. And especially in the early stage days, it's invaluable. And I think that those specific examples that you're mentioning, those are exactly the types of things
right.
that I would honestly that I would be looking for in a fund that I would want to partner with, because at the end of the day, it's that partnership. And I think that what I've been understanding throughout this show is that that's also part of the dynamic that's been changing over the past years with venture capital. It's becoming more of a partnership, less of a financial body that gives you this great loan at great terms, but it's really about the partnership, and you're really adding on more people to your organization. But Gil, we have very, very little time left. I have to ask you for 2 or 3 nuggets from seeing thousands of deals to myself and fellow young entrepreneurs that are starting their journey or on their journey. What are some really critical things to keep in mind as we move forward?
Jeez.
It's a hard
I think
question.
I think that wins the prize for the most broad question imaginable. I could literally answer anything and it would work. Look. I think I would probably give 2 pieces of advice. One is take a long view take a long view of your business and take a long view of your relationships with investors, with co-founders, with employees, even with customers. That's, I think, a super important perspective that a lot of founders, particularly in today's climate, are missing out on. There are, I'd like to paraphrase Churchill. I think never before in the history of finance has so much venture money been distributed so quickly by so many people with so little experience, right?
Wow.
There are funds that didn't exist last year with associates writing $10 million Series A checks into pre-revenue companies. Now, sometimes that's going to work. Sometimes there's some brilliant insight there or some relationship that enables that to happen. A lot of times there isn't. And a lot of times that associate 2 years from now is going to be a partner in some other firm and you're going to be an orphan. And I think that and that's true with co-founders, and that's true with employees, it's true with a lot of things. I think take a long-term view on the relationships you're building, on your product strategy, going back to category, all of that stuff. I think the second thing I would say, and it absolutely, it's like talking my book, but I think it's true, is I think being intellectually honest with yourself and having real intellectual intimacy with your investors, of course, with your co-founders, but certainly with your investors as well, about what is it that we're here to do, what is motivating us,
I love that.
How much money do we really need, what is really unique about our company. What do we know? What do we not know? Right? How are we going to de-risk this thing? Those are things I think are often getting forgotten in the quest to. I think a lot of founders are simply they can smell the blood in the water. They know that the pendulum is on their side. They know there's always going to be someone writing them a term sheet at a higher price. And it is almost easier to raise money with nothing than with something, because if you've got something, people start judging you. If you've got nothing, you've just got stories, you can raise a ton of money. And I think that can become a treadmill to destruction very, very quickly, actually, unless people are really honest with themselves and with each other about what are we trying to do here, what do we know, what do we not know. And the going gets rough very quickly, whether you raise 20 million or whether you raise 2. It eventually gets rough. And so you want to surround yourself with people that understand why you're doing it and where you have a shared set of values and set of objectives.
Gil, I'm leaving here with the intellectual intimacy. I love that phrase, and I'm sorry, but I'm gonna steal it from time to time because I think that it just says exactly what I've been thinking for so long, and I've been pondering myself, what type of company will I want to start in, what type of relationships do I want to build, and I think it boils down to intellectual intimacy and having that shared foundation for partnerships. So thank you for that, Gil. Before we leave, I have to ask you the hardest question. This one, it's less vague, but it's more specific. 3 words that you would use to describe yourself.
I think, intellectual honesty, let's say that's one word.
Well, there's a hyphen.
Resiliency. I think I'm pretty resilient, and I think I'm pretty relentless. I think what founders notice when they work with me is that when I'm out there fighting for them, I'm not going to give up, and I think they see that. And I think when I disagree with them about something or feel I need to call their attention to something, I'm not going to sugarcoat it or wait until the next board meeting, because you deserve to know what I think today. You can disagree with me and go do something else, but like what I owe you is my honest opinion based on what you're telling me today. I reserve the right to change my mind in 3 seconds, but I think when it's a popularity contest, it's very destructive. It's actually not helpful. It's much better to argue. And I think that's one of the things I learned in Israeli venture, where they would just argue all day long. And it was amazing because you heard every opinion in the room. You knew where everybody stood. There was no mystery. And then the founders would go off and decide what they thought, and they would go do what they wanted to do. And then next board meeting, the VCs would come and yell at them again. And they would say, no, I'm doing it my way. And that's fine. And then sometimes the VC, no, I was wrong, you were right. And sometimes the other way around, but at least you get everything out. And I think that's super important. I think when people are too focused on making everything seamless, right, you're losing the benefit of having the perspectives in the room anyway.
I
right?
completely agree. And it brings me back a few years ago reading Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell talking about the flight crashes and boiling it down to being willing to have that controversy in the room, in the cockpit, regardless of ranks. When the going gets tough, you say your mind and you have an open conversation.
Right.
Otherwise, the plane goes down. So, Gil, thank you very, very much. This was just insightful and wonderful. Thank you for being so generous, and stay safe and stay healthy.
Thank you. You too. Thank you.